Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. الصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. Okay, so they are on the camel and he is trying to kiss her. And he says, فقلت لها سيري وأرخي زمامه ولا تبعديني من جناك المعلل. So I told her, Siri, let the camel travel, i.e., so majaz aqli, meaning let the camel travel. وأرخي زمامه, let go of the reins. ولا تبعديني, do not distance me from جناك المعلل, from your sweet cheeks, or sweet low hanging fruit, right? Janak. So he says, الهاء تعود على عنيزة, assuming that she's a person, right? قال اسمعي والمعنى هوني عليك ولا تبالي أأقر أم سلمة. I don't worry about it, right? أرخي زمامه, let it go, don't worry about it, right? وقوله من جناك قال اسمعي جعلها بمنزلة شجرة لها جنن فجعل ما يصيب من رائحتها وحديثها وقبلها. So he's treating the word, so usually the word qubla is a kiss, I guess kissing, presumably. بمنزلة ما يصيب من رائحة الشجرة وثمرها. Okay, so jana is a low-hanging fruit. وجنى جنتين dan. The fruits of the trees are easy to reach, right? Are dani, are close. Right, so he says, and do not distance your the fruits that could be picked from you, right? So he says this is majaz, this is kinaya makniya, right? Kinaya makniya, right? So we can either say do ijra of the isti'ara in the kaf, in the key, and say, as he says, جعلها بمنزل شجرة لها جنان. So in which case jana is haqiqa. Um, um, jana is haqiqa. Because if it wasn't haqiqa, then there'd be no way to make key majaz, right? So the lazim, the what we call it, yeah, the lazim, which is jana is haqiqa, and we do ijra of the majaz of the istara in the kaf, that she is being compared to a tree, okay? Or we say she is haqiqa, and her smell, her speech, being with her physically and emotionally is like fruit, in which case it's isti'ara tasrihiyya, right? So you can't do both though, right? You can't say she is like a tree and it. So the isti'ara, the majaz has to be in one of the two. Because if jana means speaking to her, being with her physically and emotionally, then the key is not like a tree, right? But if jana is haqiqa, meaning if we treat that, then key is implicitly being compared to the tree. Does that make sense?
Yes. Sheikh, do they have debates like in the Quran whether like this the isti'ara is of this kind or of this kind and that has like thamara?
Mm, that has a thamara. That whether it has a thamara, I don't know. That's something else. So, for example, in وَأُولَٰئِكَ عَلَىٰ هُدًى مِّن رَبِّهِمْ, I'm pretty sure Alusi. Check it out. I'm pretty sure Alusi has a debate there. Three positions. Is it isti'ara tasrihiyya? Is it isti'ara makniyya? Or isti'ara what's it called? Tamthiliyya. So do we say that ala means something else? Do we say that isti'ara is in the word ala? Right? Hum mutamakkinuna min al-huda, and it's like ala. So the ulu is like tamakkun. So is it in ala? Or is huda like a markub? Is there the isti'ara makniya between the between guidance and a ride that they've been given. They've been given this really good camel to take them through the desert, which is called a guidance from the Lord, and they are on it, like well established on it. Or is it isti'ara tamthiliya, which is things? So isti'ara tamthiliya, the easiest what things are like phrases, right? When you say, the guy kicked the bucket. So you're not trying to say it's kicking is metaphorical, the bucket is metaphorical. What you're trying to say is this person dying is like the scenario of somebody being hung with a bucket underneath their foot, and you kick the bucket from underneath their foot, and then they die, right? Or he snuffed it, meaning he's like somebody who was dying, and people were staying up at night with him, looking after him, and eventually they realized he was dead, so they just turned the light out, they turned the candle off, and they snuffed the candle, right? So he snuffed it. Um, that's isti'ara. So these phrases are all isti'ara. They're like all phrases basically like isti'ara tamthiliya, like it's a whole picture. He's having cold feet about the new project, right? So you're not saying that the project is the sea, nor are you saying that he is the person standing at the sea. But it's the whole picture of somebody wanting to go into the sea, but his feet are cold, and he's feeling that if I go in the sea, it'll even be more cold. So I don't really want to go inside, So he's hesitant about it. It's the whole picture, right? So that's isti'ara tamthiliya. Um, so that's another option. But as it having a thamara, like, oh my God, you would change the fiqh, you've changed the aqidah. I don't think so. Right? So we have to understand as well that these tadqiqat, let's look at just in terms of the history of like an educational history. You know, did um, you know, okay, let's go to an extreme thing. Did Imam Muhammad study Nahu, like formally? No, but there's certainly grammatical discussions, right? Like there are grammatical things. You see it. They are sensitive to these grammatical things, right? At least. Okay, did Imam Nawawi or I don't know somebody at that time al-Quduri did he study Nahu? Of course, right? They would have studied Nahu, right? Um, so did Imam Nawawi study Nahu? Yes. Did Imam Nawawi study Balagha? I don't think so. So here we're talking about like just Imam Nawawi as a as a standard in civilization. We're coming to the peak of civilization, right? 6th, 7th century of Islam, where all the sciences reaching their maturity, and here's a person who hasn't even studied logic or balagha. You know what I'm saying? So how could it be that important? Let alone is it isti'ara tamthili or whatever. So the concept is of majaz, right? That's important. Does Imam know we know the concept of majaz? Yes. Okay, great. But did he study, you know, did he ever read, I don't know, Asrar al-Balagha by Abdul Qahir Jurjani? Probably not, you know. I think we have this, we have a somewhat of his transcript. I don't think he studied any of these things. Al-Qadi Abu Bakr ibn Arabi, I don't think he studied Balagha. So Balagha is somewhat late, you know. It coming as like standard curriculum is somewhat late. So it's going to be like, oh, it's going to be funny if it's like, um, super important, right? Does that make sense? So I sound a bit like a Salafi, right? In that like the Salaf didn't do it, so therefore it doesn't count, right? But there's here I'm not saying the Salaf. I'm saying the not the Khalaf al-Khalaf, but the Khalaf did it, right? Like somebody at this late stage, it can't be that important, seriously, you know.
Yeah, I mean, do you think it's useful to us that
One
we
one
get
hundred
that
percent,
this better sense?
100%, right? That's like saying, for example, you're like, well, Imam Nawawi didn't study geography, so who cares about geography? And I ask you about tectonic plates, you don't know what a tectonic plate is. That's a problem, right? So it's not it's
Yeah.
not it's not true to say it's not useful, but to make it fundamental, right? So this is a key thing that you will find is that like, somebody who didn't study at my madrasa knows nothing. If you didn't study with my sheikh, you're nobody, right? A lot of these things are like, really? You know, if you haven't memorized Quduri, you know nothing. It's like, really? Can't be that significant. Right? So a lot of these things, like what is super important, it can't be that important because you know. But the concept of majaz, that's pretty important, right? The concept of majaz. So but the thing is, you will be exposed to the concept of majaz through usul fiqh and through kalam, right? So kalam is one of the key things that created balagha. So um, but let's say these big people talking about usul fiqh or kalam, like that would Abu Hassan Ashari or Abu Mansur Maturidi, would they be able to speak about these different types of majaz and all these things? Don't think so. In the same way that we would do, in the same way that you would expect a graduate from madrasa to do. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So here's
Yeah.
like somebody like Sheikh Hamza Karamali, right? I think he did the Mutawwal with Sheikh Hassan Hito, and Sheikh Hassan Hito's like, like we used to memorize that. Like that's what we used to memorize, right? I think they either did Khalis or memorize it, and so like this is what I expect the talib to be able to do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, Sheikh Hassan Hito said, if you haven't memorized the what's it called, the Maqsoor Mamdood of Ibn Durayd, like you'll die, you know. So this like hardcore, like you need to know everything, or mu'allaqat, right? He was like, even my son who's not a talib ilm knows the mu'allaqat. Like, how can you not know the mu'allaqat? You know? So pretty hardcore people. Um, and so today, again, like let's say somebody coming out madrasa, like you don't know this, you don't. What is it? The book they do in Jadal in the Rashidiyah in
Yeah.
Al-Bahth Munadhara. It's like you don't know that. Do you? It's like, oh, I don't know. Okay, you're not educated. Period. Right? But in reality, is that like actually the case? Like, do the Mauritanians do the Rashidiyah or ilm al-Bahth wal Munadhara aslan? You know, don't think so. So it can't be that important. Or ilm al-wada, like, oh, you didn't study ilm al-wada, you haven't done even basic talab ilm. So if you look at, so I think like Imam Nawawi, he did some kind of some things like by Ibn Jinni in Nahu, and like what's it called? Ibn Sikit was a book by Ibn Sikit, Islah al-Mantiq, right? Which is more like tadqiq lughawi, you know? Like what does this word mean? Was that but just like a list of like words, or like tricky words, that kind of like this word means this word means this. It's kind of like tricky stuff. Islah al-Mantiq by Ibn Sakit. Right? So today, nobody would teach that, and they would find that kind of a waste of time. I mean, it's just kind of a cool thing, whereas not doing a talkhis, right? Uh, or not doing tahdhib al-mantiq, like, oh my God, you didn't do tahdhib mantiq. Oh, you know, you haven't done intermediate mantiq. You're not educated. That's how it would be. Wallahu a'lam.
So, Sheikh,
Go ahead.
when we like, okay, so these things are basically like tahsiniyat, right? So
Well, depends
when
who
we're
again who
thinking,
you talk to, right? So it's a bit
we're
like it's a
talking to you, so we're getting your opinion.
yeah, no, but it depends who you talk to. So again, like I'll give you an example, right? In when you're doing your high school certificate, or probably even your degree in America, they do not expect you to question the philosophy of the philosophy of sciences. They don't expect you to question that, right? Like the philosophy of science, is that a class in high school?
No,
Whereas in Europe it is. So when you do the IB, anybody, if you're doing anything in the IB, in that International Baccalaureate, you will have to do the TOK, which is theory of knowledge. So you will discuss how you know what you know. So for them, that's secondary education. That's not even undergrad education. That is secondary school education. You have to know. You have to be able to challenge the way that you think about chemistry, anthropology, art, religion. Like you have to question ways of what sources of knowledge. That's a key thing, right? My friend Rami, the Kiflain, owner of Kiflain, he teaches the TOK in Jordan to like to people doing the So for them, it's like you're not educated. You don't even have, you're not even, it's not a degree or a master's or a PhD. You're just not educated. If you cannot question what the basis of anthropology and chemistry and religion, and you can't question how we know what we know, you're not educated, right? Whereas in America, it's fine, right? So there's different standards. So in a normal late madrasa, okay, Ottoman, Indo-Pak, um, uh, Azhari, I don't know about Zaytuna in North Africa, but yeah, these are basic things, right? Look at the books that, for example, look at the books that Zakaria Ansari has a commentary on, right? So basically, he's like a teacher. All his books are like Darasi books, you know. So he has a book, Sharh al-Aqaid, Hashi on Sharh al-Aqaid. He has in Tajweed, right? Jazariya. He has things in obviously in fiqh that people will actually study, not just references. Mantiq, Isa Ghoji. Um, uh, I'm not sure what else. Sarf, right? He has a hashia on the what's it called? On the Shafia, you know. So this is what you do. There's like here's a person who's like teaching these things. This is what one would study, right? And if you haven't studied them, you're not educated. You're not an alim, you know. So when you say tahsiniyat, ala hasab, right? How who depends on how you talk who you talk to. For me, I'm just saying, well, look at it somewhat objectively. It can't be that important, you know. If Qadi Abu Bakr al-Arabi can get away without, he did like the Astro Globe, the Astro, what's it called? Astro, what's it called? Astro Globe, is it called? He did a lot, like he talks about maths and all these things that he studied that these things are important to him. He did the Qira'at al-Ashr, you know. He did all these things, but he didn't do other stuff that we would do today, right? And he's in the 7th century, right? Or 6th century for 6th century. So he's a student of Imam Ghazali, 6th century.
Sheikh does like
So sorry,
the combination
Muhammad,
of all
did I
these.
answer your question, Side?
Yes.
Inshallah. Okay, go ahead, Muhammad.
Like just that thought, like does the combination of these all, for example, like what you find is maybe the early scholars, different places or kind of different scholars has they had different ways of studying, and then you find like the later scholars that come after them, they end up maybe studying from scholars from that line, from the other line, and they end up combining a lot of things. And before we can refine and have kind of a standard out of it, you may end up people studying a lot of things that may not be all of them like that important at the same time.
Yeah, but in general, what you find in the late scholars, generally, all late scholars will say, for example, علم البحث والمناظرة, المنطق, البلاغة, these are all basic things. Like it's like you've never done algebra, or you've never done calculus, or you've never done, let's say, for example, you've done algebra, you've done calculus, but you've never done probability, right? So, I mean, so like you don't know anything about probability. That's kind of you can't, like you're just not educated. That's how they
Yeah,
say.
it's like when you have, for example, in engineering, like you have all the engineering at the beginning doing the same thing. Like
Yeah.
as if you
So
have
so
not
so
done.
if you go across the world for the last 500 years, that's the basic picture. You'll be like, yeah, everybody who's educated would have done these things. You can't not know about isti'ara tasrihiyya, right? Um, but is it actually that important? That's the question, right? Is it actually that important, right? So somebody would say it's not tahsini at all, and you're jahil if you don't know these things. You're just uneducated, like you're not a graduate. And others would say, no, it's tahsiniyat. These are nice things. Ilm al-bahth munadhara, that's great. Mantiq, that's great. You know, mu'allaqat, that's great. Balagha, that's great. It's not that important. Allahu a'lam. Does that make sense? Whereas fiqh, for example, you say at-talaq al-bid'i, and you're like, I don't know what that is. And you're like, no, you can't don't know anything. Because, you know, these are basic masail that everybody has always known. Does that make sense? So then another practical question then is, okay, what's relevant to me, right? To me as a so there is somebody who is trying to, you know, excuse me, who's trying to be a talib ilm, um, but I'm also a part-time talib ilm. So what should I cut out? So I think there's a lot of things you should cut out. So I think I mentioned to share to you, so many of you, Sheikh Afifi Atkiki, or he's here now in Malaysia, but he was in University of Oxford. I remember him telling my brother like 20 years ago, he's like, why are you doing Alfiya? Why are you doing Ajurumiyya? You don't need to do those. Right? Just do Mat Nabi Shuja', do Reliance of the Traveler, khalas, that's your deen, fiqh, halal, and then do these two books, like two English books in Arabic grammar, and that's it. Done. You don't need to do the Alfiya. Like, there's lots of things you don't need to do, right? Because you're not a full-time student. And so I don't need to do all of these various different things, particularly if they're going to take time, right? So I did, for example, I did the Maqulat al-Ashr in 20 minutes, right? So that's right, like familiar with kind of that general idea, but that's not really studying it, you know what I mean? But imagine, for example, I'm going to spend 2 years, here's a class, for example, it's a 2 to 4 year class in Mantiq, like really, and it's going to take 2 hours a week. Is it really worth my time? Given that I only have 3 hours a week, so 2/3 of my whole life, you know, or I have 10 hours, so 25%, right? So it's very important to look at your life and be realistic. Inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will barak and give you more time, but be realistic. This is my life. This is how much time I have. This is what I can actually do. So I personally, for example, I don't believe in doing the 6 books I mentioned before to many of you. I don't even believe I'm doing right now the Muntaqa of Ibn Jarud. Excellent. I believe the Muntaqa is excellent, and the Muwatta of Imam Malik is excellent, or the Muwatta of Imam Muhammad, one of the two. Right? It's great. I think that's good. Right? And you can read, Riyad Salihin by yourself, read Kitab al-Adhkar by yourself, whatever. That's fine. Right? But there's a lot of things like you can't do. Right? Surah al-Baqarah from al-Baydawi or something like it. Khalas, that's it. You did Surah al-Baqarah. That's long enough. Right? You can't do the whole Quran from Baydawi or something like that in tafsir. It's not possible.
Like, is there a way to prioritize? For example, like for us, like where like Somalis, there's a way they plan. For example, like when I started, they were taught like, oh, you kind of start with the Fard al-Ain, like for example, Quran to certain level, and then introduction of all other things, and then from there, like
Yeah,
focus
yeah,
on,
but there's
we
there's
were told
basically certain
focus on
things.
this, and then
There's
go
certain
slow.
things you don't need an introduction to. For example, you don't need an introduction to logic necessarily, unless it's going to be very short. For example, a 1 day
Yeah,
thing.
they don't do that. Yeah,
Yeah, so you do a 1 day thing of mantiq. Okay, great. That's it. It's pretty simple. 1 day thing, ilm al-bahth wal munadara. Right? Khalas, done. Right?
my
So,
question is like, for example, like for
but the
example,
issue
if
is
you
the
have
issue is what
no
you do.
knowledge in,
Go ahead.
like you have not started it, like studying fiqh in depth, you just have the beginners level, like so then there's nahwi. So like, which one do you focus on first? Is it important to focus on nahw first and then come to fiqh,
Yeah,
or
generally we do. Generally, like nahu is a key to many things. So nahu and fiqh are both keys to many things. So basically, as far I know from the Shanatiqa and Mauritanians, is they will start with a very basic fardain, and then you do nahu and fiqh. So nahu, fiqh, and tajweed, these are the most basic fundamental things, right? So nahu slash Arabic and fiqh and tajweed, like my tajweed is off, right? It's a problem, right? But what I'm talking about is getting into things. So here the question that started off was so Sheikh Saeed, he asked a question, do you find discussions on whether it's isti'ara tasrihiyya or makniyya or whatever it is, and that having a thamara, like that's really important, right? And I'm like, not really. So therefore, if I didn't know, like, I understand what you're talking about. Like, we all know the joke. This policeman pulled me over, and he said, and give me your driver's license. He oinked. Okay, we all know what that means. If the policeman oinked, we all know what he is, right? You don't have to study balagha to do that, right? So a lot of balagha is you can get it anyway. Some things in balagha you won't. So it is very useful, but it is essential. Like for me, like it's part of the way that I think. It's part of the way that I read Arabic, right? But is it like, oh, I would be lost totally if I didn't have it? Not really. You know, it's okay. Allahu Alam. So the issue is how important is it, right? Allahu Alam. But I just do believe that for the non-Talib ilm, I'm not a full-time student. You do have to edit a lot of things. Or do things in a very informal way. Like, okay, one weekend on mantiq, one weekend on whatever, something. That's, wallahu alam. Khair. Time is of the essence. Time is a very important question. Like right now I have for the last 10 days Hashid Sharwani open on my desk. I need to find this thing and find the reference from there to somewhere else, trying to find something. So what's more important? That or finishing, I don't know, something else. Like that's pretty important, you know. So if it's there for 1 week and I don't have time, do I? So we have to just prioritize things. Right? And again, there's a big difference between that and you're 14 and you're in madrasa and you have a 14-hour day, 6 days a week as a madrasa. It's very different. In madrasa haqqaniya in Peshawar or wherever it is in Afghanistan, totally different picture, right? Or you're going to spend 10 hours a day memorizing this sharh on Khalil. Like you're memorizing the matan of the Khalil with the sharh, and you're going to do this 10 hours a day for the next 4 years, and that's all you're going to focus on. And you're 14, 16, 18, right? But, most of us are not in that camp, so you have to do things in a different way. Wallahu alam. Khair. So he says, فَجَعَلَ مَا يُصِيبُ مِنْ رَائِحَتِهَا وَحَدِيثِهَا وَقُبْلِهَا بمنزلة ما يصيب من رائحة الشجرة وثمرها والمعلل الشاغل الذي يعللني ساعة بعد ساعة. It busies me. Right? ويقال للمعلل الملهي. It entertains me, distracts me. معلل something to rely on. معلل. Right? Then he says وموضع سيري جزم بتأويل لام ساقطة كأنه قيل لتسيري. So he's following the position of the Kufiyun, right? And here's an example, right? You look at this class, says this priority. It's a priority for me. I think it's important. I'm learning things. I think it's really important. Might not be priority for you, right? So we have to be careful, right? كأنه قال لتسيري وعلامة الجزم فيه سقوط النون. Right. لأن الأصل سيرين وكذا. So here the Kufiyun, they say there's two types of verbs, ماضي and مضارع. That's it. Right? Or مستقبل and مضارع and ماضي. Right? Whereas we say there's أمر, مضارع and ماضي. There's three. So this is not مجزوم. Right? We don't call it مجزوم. سيري is not is مبني على ما جزم به. Is مبني as a فعل أمر. Like اذهب. اذهب is not the same as لتذهب. لتذهب فعل مجزوم. اذهب مبني. Right? okay. وكذلك أرخي زمامه. وقوله لا تبعديني من جناك موضع تبعديني جزم ولا تبعديني على النهي بلا وعلامة الجزم فيه سقوط النون ولا تبعدينني وكان الأصل لا تبعدينني والجنى مخفوض بين والمعلل نعته وجنى النخل والشجر مجتني من ثمرها قال تعالى وجنى جنتين دان قال الشاعر طيب ثمار في رياض أريضة وأغصان أشجار جناها على قربي فعول مفاعيل فعول مفاعل فعول مفاعيل فعول مفاعيل على قرب مفاعيل. Right? وطيب ثمار في رياض أريضة وأغصان أشجار جناها على قربي. So here's case in point. Do I actually know Arud? I don't know Arud. Can I use it most of the time? Yeah. So I know enough. Like I really don't care about Arud. If you tell me like what's the terms, what's the watad, what's the I don't know, and I don't care. I'm not really interested. But notice I knew enough to know this is on this pattern, right? I know enough, like just enough to get by, right? فمثلي كحبلى قد طرقت ومرضع فألهيتها عن ذي تمائم محولي. Okay, so here, Sheikh Ali Hani is very funny. I have something to say about. I asked Saeed asked Sheikh Ali Hani about the confusions from last week, so I'll talk about that in a second. But anyway, he said when somebody boasts about their sexual prowess, it's probably because they have a problem, right? It's often the case, right? That people will boast about things because they have a problem, right? You know, let's say somebody who's really insecure, he'd be like, "Yeah, I shot 10 people by the age of 5," you know? Like he's really scared. He's really scared about what people think. So he'll say, "Yeah, I don't give a damn about what people think about me." So he's actually really the person who goes around saying that and using language like that is somebody who's really insecure, you know. Um, a woman who dresses, who really makes a big effort about dressing well outside is super insecure, right? Um, um, so anyway, so he says, "فَمِثْلِكِ," how many a woman like you, right? So the fa. So he says, فَمِثْلِكِ مَخْفُوضٌ بِإِضْمَارِ رُبَّ فَرُبَّ فَرُبَّ امْرَأَةٍ مِثْلِكِ. Right? How many a woman like you? Right? حُبْلَى, who was pregnant, قَدْ طَرَقْتُ, have I visited at night? Right? So طَرَقَ can mean to visit at night and can also mean to copulate with. Right? So you say, you refer to what is it? طروقة الفحل is what's is the 3-year-old camel. It's called طروقة الفحل. طروقة. She can be knocked, so as to speak. She can be mated with by the male camel, right? That's called طرقة. So طرقة can mean to copulate. It can also mean to visit at night. So how many a pregnant woman like you have a visit at night? So that ومرضع, and also a woman who was breastfeeding, right? So the point is here two things. Number one, uh, what's it called physically, and in terms of hormones, the default if a woman is pregnant and I know not all the time, but by default, a woman who is pregnant or a woman who is breastfeeding, she is not in the mood for relations by default, because why would her body want to become pregnant when she's already pregnant, right? So it's often the case, a woman who is breastfeeding, she cannot become pregnant, right? It doesn't have to be like that, but it can be. And so basically, he's saying a woman, how many a woman like you, who is in the most uninterested situation of having intercourse because she's pregnant or because she's breastfeeding. فَأَلْهَيْتُهَا, I distracted her, and the تَمَائِمَ مُحْوِلِي, from a kid who was from a baby who was wrapped in talismans, right? I.e., she was really concerned about the baby. Muhwili, and he was only 1 year old, right? I.e., here's a woman who was with her baby and would usually be distracted and focused on the baby and not her husband or some man. And the baby is in a vulnerable situation, so she'd be even more distracted. But I فَأَلْهَيْتُهَا, right? Despite the fact that she was A, pregnant, B, breastfeeding, not emotionally or physically in the mood, but because of my sexual prowess, ألهيتها, I distracted her from everything else, right? فمثلك مخفوض بإضمار رب كأنه قال فرب مثلك. وقال الشاعر وملهل فيه الغراب ميت سقيت منه قوم واستقيت. right? ومنهل, and how many, right? A water hole. وأراد ورب منهل, right? It's called, but this is called واو ربا or فاء ربا, right? It's quite common. وقفر, and how many an empty desert, right? قال آخر ورسم, I guess the ورسم دار وقفت في طلله بت أقضي الحياة من جلله. جلل من أجله, من جلل ذلك, من أجل ذلك. أراد رب رسمي, فأسقط رب وأسقط الواو التي تخلفها. So he says, so here this is very interesting because, or both of them are scenario. So we have a concept. Could you have an implied amil? So yeah, right? Zaydan Zaydan meaning ilzam Zaydan, right? You could have an implied amil, right? Right? Um, uh, هنا meaning Zaydun huna, right? موجود يعني هو موجود. It's very common to have an implied amil. But could you have an implied harf jar, right? The answer is, but no, you cannot do that, right? So once my mum sent me an email and she signed ummika, right? Meaning from your mother. So she dropped the and, right? And you know, and said basically, and said we dropped the word from, but just made it majrur because it implied from your mother, right? You can't do that by default. But here, this example, you're doing that. You actually, فمثلك, there is it's majrur of a harf jar شبه زائد مقدر, right? Harf jar شبه زائد مقدر. So رب is شبه زائد. Okay, so what says وحبل خفض على الإتباع لمثلي لأن مثلا تأويلها تأويل النكرة, right? So here it says حبلى is indefinite and مثل is also indefinite. So why is مثل indefinite if it's mudaf to something definite? Like if I said بيت زيد الطويل, right? And بيت زيد الطويل, Zayd's tall house. سيارتك السريعة, your fast car, right? So what's the difference?
Sorry, you said سيارتك السريع and versus what?
Yeah, so usually if a word is mudaf to a damir, it's going to be definite, right? Anything that's mudaf to a damir is going to be definite, so therefore its nat is going to be definite, right? If I said Abu Sa'id al-Fadilu, right? So the nat of Abu is going to be definite because mudaf to a definite, right? But mithl is not like that. So hubl is a nat of mithli, and hubl is indefinite. You don't say ومثل كل, you don't say مثل كل حبلى. You don't say that. You say فمثلك حبلى. Okay? So غيرك غير زيد. مثلك مثل زيد. شبه زيد. Right? The word shibh, the word mithl, the word غير, these words, even if you make them mudaf to something definite, they do not become definite. Right? هذا غير زيد. That's not definite. I don't know who he is, do I? هذا زيد, I know who you're talking about. هذا غير زيد. So غير is mudaf to ma'rifah, but it's not ma'rifah. Right? زيد زيد مثل عمرو. مثل عمرو is not definite, it's indefinite. Even though it looks definite. Does that make sense? Because what it means is فرب امرأة مماثلة لك حبلى. مماثلة لك حبلى. So مثل means مماثل لك, like you, right? غير means مغاير له. وغير زيد أفضل, right? Somebody, any person other than Zayd would be better, right? Any أحد مغاير لزيد أفضل. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So غير مثل, and this is what they call it متولغ في في الإبهام, right? متولغ في الإبهام. So he says وحبلى خفض على الإتباع لمثل لأن مثلا تأويلها تأويل النكرة. It's interpreted as the indefinite. ولفظها لفظ المعرفة فتتبعها حبلى وهي نكرة من أجل تأويلها. Okay. وقد طرقت صلة حبلى, right? This is قد طرقت, this is جملة صغرى, this is a جملة في محل جار, or في محل رافع in reality, but the point is describing مثل, right? How many a woman like you who is pregnant have I visited at night, or have I slept with, right? والهاء وقد تركت صلة حبلى. والهاء مضمرة المضمرة, right? The pronoun تعود عليها كأنك so here where is it? فألهيتها goes back to مثل because she's female, right? ومرضع he says مخفوض على النسق أي معطوف نسق. ويجوز أن تكون حبلى منصوبة على القطع من مثل, right? منصوب على القطع, this is حال, right? So this is again Kufi term where you do منصوب على القطع. So you say for example زيد الطويل زيد طويلا, زيد الطويل زيد so the way they look at it is like this. جاء زيد الباكي, the crying Zaid came. جاء زيد باكيا, Zaid came while crying. So the way they look at it is, if you look at the words, the L was dropped and then it became mansub. So they call it mansub على القطع, right? So he's saying maybe حبلى is mansub على القطع, like it should be ومثلك الحبلى, we mean it mansub على القطع. أن يكون حبلى منصوبة على قطع من مثلي لأن لفظها لفظ المعرفة. Okay. ويجوز
But don't you have to have the if the sahib al is nakira has to come before
yeah, but
or
it's saying it
after?
has that because it's basically somewhere in between. It has the lafz of the ma'rifah, but it has the meaning of the nakira. Like what was it? Al-himaru yahmilu asfara. Right. So al-himar yahmilu asfara means كحمار يحمل أسفارا. So it means the donkey, meaning the generic donkey. So it is definite. So you can treat the sentence after as a hal or treat it as an ad, either way. Like Usama as well. جاء Usama, right? Uh, Mr. Lion has come, meaning any lion. But it is Mr. Lion, so you can treat it as definite and indefinite because it means any lion, but the word outwardly it's Mr. Lion, capital L. Or Mr. Fox. جاء ثعالة, right? جاء ثعالة. Does that make sense? You can treat it as so you can say هذا ثعالة مقبلا ومقبل. Here is Mr. Fox coming towards us or coming towards us. Treat it as hal or treat it as a sifa. Because it's from one point of view it's definite, the other point of view is not definite. That's what he's trying to say. You can look at it in two ways.
Mhm.
ويجوز نصب ويجوز نصب مرضع من وجهين أحدهما أن تنسق على الحبلى. So if you made حبلى if you made it منصوب then you could do that. والوجه الثاني أن تنسق على الهاء مضمرة أي طرقت مرضعا, right? So you can make it basically it's like saying ومرضعا وطرقت مرضعا, right? So طرقت so yeah, to make it basic مفعول به of implied verb طرقت مرضعا. Which says ولم يروي النصب أحد, but nobody's noted that. He's just saying theoretically that. قال الأعشى فمثلك معجبة. Notice that. So this is a حال, even though this is indefinite in reality, but it is definite لفظا. فمثلك معجبة بالشباب صاك العبير بأجسادها. فنصب معجبة على القطع من مثل. So he's calling it حال لأن لفظها لفظ معرفة، ويجوز الخفض لأن تأويلها تأويل نكرة. قال امرؤ القيس فمثلك بيضاء العوارض طفلة لعوب تنسيني إذا قمت سربالي. Right. فمثلك بيضاء العوارض لعوب. Notice. Right. وزعم الكسائي أنهم ربما نصبوا بيضاء العوارض طفلة ثم يخفضون لعوبا، ويجوز خفض بيضاء العوارض طفلة ويروى. Okay, فمثلك بكرا قد تركت ومرضع. Notice as well, right? فبك منصوب على قطع. Same thing. He says والمرضع مخفوض بالواو التي خلفت ربا ورب right? So he's saying that the wow that was التي خلفته or خلفتها ربا. The wow that was left over by ربا has done خفض of مرضع. كأن تقول ورب امرأة أخرى ترضع ولدها قد تركتها. والأصمعي معنى فمثل أن الحب لا تريد الرجال ولا تشتهيهم. Right? يقول فهي ترغب في لجمالي، وكل حامل تمنع الذكر إلا المرأة. Right. Um, ومعناه أتيتها فغلبتها على نفسها حتى لهيت عن ولدها. ويقال طرقت الرجل إذا أتيته ليلا، ولا يكون الطروق إلا بالليل. قال الله عز وجل والسماء والطارق. الطارق النجم سمى طارق لأنه يطرق بالليل. وقال جرير طرق الخيال لأم جزرة موهنا ولا حب بالطرف الملم خبال. قال هند بن عتبة نحن بنات طارق نمشي على النمارق. Right, this is at أحد. نحن بنات النجم في الحسن نحن بنات طارق يعني الطارق. نحن بنات النجم في الحسن والعز نمشي على النمارق. And so here نمارق, some people say it means pillows, which would make sense because it goes there's was zarabiyu, right, carpets, and then before that pillows, but then it'd be a bit odd you walk on pillows, you know. Allahu A'lam. But this hadith is ajib, subhanAllah, really, really important. It was happening, I read this, subhanAllah, like a year ago or something like that. And, you know, the whole, obviously, Palestine hasn't stopped, but, you know, things were really kicking off at that time. And it was just ajib. So the story goes is that, you know, the story that we were familiar with is, um, who is it? من أخذها بحقها من أخذه بحقه. Right, so the Prophet holds out the sword at Uhud and says, "Who will take the sword?" And everyone says, "I'll do it." And then the Prophet says, "Who will take it with what is due to it?" And then who is it does it? Abu Dujana, right? He takes it. فَفَلَقَ بِهِ what is it? Ham al-Mushrikeen. Like he really fought and like smashed the Mushrikeen with it. Excuse me. The part that doesn't the extra part is that he got all the way through past the ranks and got up to where Hind was, where the women were at the back. And she had this whole line that she was saying, basically we're beautiful women. We're here for you men. If you lose, you're not gonna have us, right? So it's like taunting the men and cheering the men on in a kind of sexual way. So basically she's telling the men fight, 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 basically. So then he turns up with the Prophet's sword, and she's there. And she's like, see, she's calling on somebody to help her. Who's going to help me against? And she wasn't Muslim, of course, at that time, right? Um, who's going to help me against this man? And he said an ajib thing. He says, I could, and so, so somebody said, like, why didn't you kill her for crying out loud? He said, I couldn't kill a woman with the sword of the Prophet. Couldn't do it. SubhanAllah, this is like the Izzah of Islam. It's like here's this woman who's at that time acting like a proper shaitan, like encouraging the men in a very bad way, right? And so, it's ajib the way he said, like, I couldn't kill, that when you say akhadahu bihaqqiha, like I couldn't kill a woman with the Prophet's sword. No, ajib. Go ahead, Said.
Sorry, could I just ask a question on the balagha discussion?
Mm-hmm.
The analytical method of balagha, it seems like it came out of kalam to prove the miraculousness of the Quran. So how do you prove the miraculousness of the Quran
Not
without
necessarily.
that?
So it's not that it came only there. So that's not. So basically, it's like you've got these two things. You've got literary analysis. Okay, that's one. If you can make it like a convolution of two things, literary analysis and kalam. Okay, so Abdul Qahir Jurjani he's a mutakallim, I believe. He's talking about, right, the Dala'il al-Ijaz, he's talking about that, right? So he is, but that's not the only thing that created it. So even part of it is, and part of literary analysis is also naqt al-sha'r in terms of thubut. So is it what's his name? Tabaqat. I don't know which book it is called. Tabaqat Shu'ara. There's different books like that. So Al-Asma'i has a book on that. There's two other books like that. Tabaqat Fuhul Shu'ara. So one of them is basically I need to have a standard to find out what is real poetry and what is not real poetry, because poetry is being made up. Right. So that's also a part of naqd al-sha'r. Is this fabricated or not? Right. So if you can
So
remember,
how do you?
we did, I think you and I, we did that book Al-Badi' by Ibn Abdul,
Yeah,
right? So he was a
yeah.
he was a hadith critic, he was a literary critic, right? And he wrote, he basically wrote against the new poetry that was coming out in the Abbasid period, and he's saying there's too many muhassanat lafdhiyya and whatever. It's kind of weird, and so
So how do you prove they are jazz in the Quran without studying balagha?
good point. So yeah. But let's say, for example, read let's say Al-Baqillani, right? There's this three essays printed together, right? Which is Abu Sulaiman al-Khattabi, Al-Baqillani, and then Ibn Rashiq al-Qayrawani, I think. I can't remember. You'll see it. There's three essays. It's a book. There's three essays printed together. Baqillani, Khattabi, and I think Ibn Rashiq al-Qayrawani. So they're both well before that period, right? So I don't know when's Abu Sulaiman al-Khattabi, what, fourth century something? It's early. Al-Khattabi. That's why I need Siri. Say Siri, when was it? Yeah, 388, right? So he's doing all sorts of things. Sharh, he's doing fiqh. He's like, he's well into fiqh. Does he do usul? Not really sure. He has a whole thing on, but it's not really, it's just not mature at that time, at least, right? So, Allahu A'lam. And then,
So would you say
and
balagha?
go ahead.
Like balagha in a technical sense is important in a defensive way, like defending Islam, but perhaps not for the Muslim who's just operating within the
No,
Islamic framework.
it is useful, right? It is useful. Like I'm doing, like it's just a useful thing. It's like imagine for example, like reading without lines. Like you're reading this book and realize there's actually no lines. Like they print in a like it's kind of funny, right? So it's like make things a bit better. Like what are you talking about? So it is like just like but mantiq, what it Suyuti says about mantiq, right? Like if you're intelligent, you don't need mantiq, and if you're not intelligent, you won't get it, you know? But it's not really true, is it? Like there is some level of like you could tidy up your argument nicely and put it into a nice way, right? So let's say, for example, you're talking about, dalalatul what's it called, the alaq, that how nahi yaqtid fasad and usul, and you're talking about it with mantiq, you can make it look a bit nicer, you can tidy up a bit, why not? You can make the whole discussion look nicer. I think. What are you talking about? Yes, the other day we were doing the waraqat definition of halal haram, and it's like, well, haram is that which is a punishment for. It's like, that's not really a definition, is it? That's to do with a lazim. What do you mean? What do you mean by definition then? So it's kind of makes it a bit nicer when you say like, okay, what kind of definitions are you talking about then? What is a definition? Like it is useful, um, but the question is it essential? And then to what extent is it how important is it? So, for example, someone like myself, again, maybe someone would criticize me, but I don't care about mantiq at all. I'm totally fine in kalam, in the level of kalam that I do, in usul al-fiqh, in fiqh, in all these things without mantiq. Totally fine. No issues whatsoever. Look up things, don't get lost, tafsir, don't get lost. I'm totally fine. I'm totally functioning member of this discussion or whatever it is, and I don't hardly know any, like I couldn't, if you ask me, here we go, teach Isa Hoji tomorrow, like I couldn't do it, you know, and I wouldn't really care about it, just like in Arud, like I can do enough for the most common bahur and get by, and this is missing and that's missing and this isn't right, but that's about it. So this discussion isn't not is it useful, but is it how useful is it?
Sheikh, is it right to say like Balagha developed not like the way he was asking like to prove the the eloquence of the Quran, but also like the era it's developed in is because of people started doing more because during the Abbasid when they had started doing a lot of share and all poetry and everything like more and more
Yeah, but
than
so the
previous.
question is its only role to defend Islam? That is not its only role. One role is
Yeah,
to make sure that you, as a thinker, think properly. So
yeah.
like
So
mantiq, ilm al-bahth wal munadhar, right? So for example, research methods. What is your research method? In the beginning of your master's, you're like, what is your research method, right? There is a certain thing that you're trying to do, and you have to define that. You don't have to spend hours. You just have to do one class, right? One class in research methods, right? That's it.
yeah,
But you don't spend hours. But imagine, for example, you did 8 classes in research methods, right? And 2 of them were in research methods in the humanities, and I'm not even doing the humanities, you know? So I'm like, I have to pay for this class. I have to pay to live in America. I have to pay for this class. It's not even relevant to my career, you know? But the professor or the university says, no, no, this is good for your education, Muhammad. This is good. It makes you a holistic person, right? Or undergrad as a doctor, right? So in America, you have to have an undergrad. Make sure you've studied. I have an undergrad, mashallah, in English literature, then I became a doctor. Wow, you're like a very important person, or a lawyer. My lawyer, my history, I did a undergrad in classics, and my postgrad it was in law. Like wow, but do I really need to do an undergrad in classics? You know, do I actually need that? Like, can I just do an undergrad in law? Can I just become a lawyer at the age of whatever, like 23? So the question is, how much extra material do you need in order to be a rounded person? You know what I'm saying? That's the question. But going back to Saeed's question, is it only there to defend Islam? No, it is not. It is there to make sure that you're thinking properly. Your argument is not logical because you're talking about one type of metaphor, but it's another type of metaphor. For example, you come along and tell me that the word that she's being compared to a tree. Okay, well, which word is metaphorical then? She, right? Or sorry, you or fruit, right? They can't both be metaphorical. Because if one's metaphorical and the other one's metaphorical, then there's no qarina, right? So you come and tell me, and I'm like, bro, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know actually making sense. Is it not noble to not make sense? But the question is, how much sense do I have to make? Like, how pedantic am I going to be about making 100% sense? You know, do I have to put a 200-page introduction to my master's thesis, introducing the various different research methods and the histories of those research methods and how they differ from research methods in something else? Like, why would I do that? You know, so how much do I need to do? Right? That's the question. It's not whether it's useful or not. It's a question of how much do I need to do with that. And if I don't need to do any of it at all, then I can just drop it totally. Does that make sense, Saeed?
Yes, Jazakumullah khair.
Mm-hmm. And here we are talking about some dude sleeping with some woman. How useful is that? May Allah protect us. Okay, wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi. So again, somebody will say, well, what are you talking about? Mantiq is way more important than this. I don't think it is. I think this is way more important than mantiq, but what can I say? Inshallah, I'll come back to this, inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.